When you stick your hand on something hot, you feel pain. This pain results in you pulling your hand away from what is hot, or makes it such an ordeal that you will only burn yourself if you absolutely have to, for example, saving a life. Similarly, giving up resources for the destitute results in one not having those resources anymore, which is a slight pain. However, one may choose to do so to achieve some internal reward or to be known as a generous man in the community. These choices are calibrated and ensure the distribution of resources in accordance with subjective value. And this includes individuals choosing to only patronize firms which donate a percentage of their profits to nobler causes or sacrifice profits for environmental considerations. And this may be a result of individuals wanting to be seen as only shopping at such places that protect the environment or donate profits to the poor, and be known as a generous person because of it, which I think is great. This desire to be known throughout the community as a generous person is not something to be derided, but something to be supported. This desire, or even greed you might say, to be known as a generous person leads to generosity, and so one should support greed in this regard. It is elegant and relatively simple how a free market operates. All of these supposed knots can be shown to be spooks in a few paragraphs, and the origins of arguments against the free market are typically some big business wanting shelter from the constant deluge of competing firms that spring up on a free market. Unfortunately, statist arguments rest on each other, and so if you show how competition keeps business honest, some dunce will claim that competition crushes wages and or results in not having enough slack in the system. Some statists like to claim that competition results in firms not having enough surplus profit or spare cash in the safe to deal with certain eventualities, and thus firms are brittle, that there's not enough slack in the system, and that it is over-optimized. And this is an error of high abstraction, and to show it is fallacious, we must go down a level. Firms are able to acquire resources by providing something people want. Forget about money for now. If there is some natural disaster that hits a shoe store, then shoe store production will recover to the extent that people are willing to buy shoes from a shoe store in the location of the shoe store that was destroyed. If this shoe store, as a result of competition, didn't have enough margin to rebuild on their own dime, then they could get a loan from some lender, probably a bank. If the shoe store had been profitable before, or even only slightly so, a loan would not be difficult to secure, especially since it would be a fairly assured investment as the business was already established. The habits of the relevant population were already established in favor of that shoe store. The argument that severe competition depresses wages on a free market is also fallacious. The argument is that firms lower the cost of goods, thus lowering profit, and thus must lower wages in a race to the bottom. You already see how that works, lowering the cost of goods. Also, having many firms in an industry means many capitalists, but the labor force isn't infinitely flexible. So if many firms start producing automobiles, then they will be competing for customers, which will bid up the wages and bid down the cost of the product. Now, what may happen is that in 10 years or so, in response to the high wages auto workers are being paid, a disproportionate number of people learn the skills necessary for auto work, and you have more auto workers than the firms need, and new firms can't be started because the public doesn't want any more cars. This is simply a misallocation of resources, and those auto workers predicted incorrectly about what skills the capitalists demanded. The workers, when getting trained, picked the wrong field, in the same way a capitalist may pick to produce the wrong product. And thus the worker won't be able to rent himself to the capitalist in the same way the capitalist won't be able to sell his product to the buyer.